Since the start of the Ukraine war, the Baltic states have consistently warned NATO and Europe about Russian aggression. Even as the conflict escalated, officials and analysts predicted Russia might attack a NATO country and trigger a larger war. We came dangerously close to that scenario on September 19, 2025, when 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets crossed into Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland and loitered for 12 incredibly tense minutes. For Estonia, enough was enough. Their response? Purchasing a staggering $4.7 billion worth of cutting-edge weapons from the United States, including a precision missile system that can strike deep into the heart of Russia itself. Estonia just turned the skies over its country into a deadly trap for Russian President Vladimir Putin's ambitions. But the seeds of this major upgrade were sown way before the current war, so let's dig into how Estonia has slowly made itself a bulwark against Russian aggression and what this means for the broader NATO-Russia relationship. For years, the Baltic states relied entirely on NATO's Baltic air policing mission for air defense. Since Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania don't operate their own fighter jets, NATO allies would rotate deployments to patrol their respective airspaces. This action began in 2004 when the Baltic states joined NATO, and for 2 decades, it was their only line of defense against Russian aircraft. That changed in 2023. In September of that year, Estonia and Latvia signed a historic €400 million or $464 million contract with German defense manufacturer Diehl Defense for the IRIS-T SLM medium-range air defense system. For Estonia, this was the largest defense procurement in the nation's history. The first deliveries arrived in late 2024, and by mid-2025, Estonia's new air defense wing would achieve operational capacity, with the country going from 0 defensive systems to one of the most comprehensive designs in the world, all in the span of about 18 months. The IRIS-T SLM itself is cutting-edge technology that has already been extensively tested against Russian threats in one of the few battlefields that could provide enormous amounts of data, Ukraine. Since late 2022, Ukrainian forces have been using IRIS-T systems to defend against Russian missile attacks, with reports suggesting that batteries have a near 100% success rate. According to Diehl Defense's CEO Helmut Rauch, by mid-2024, Ukrainian IRIS-T systems had achieved over 240 confirmed kills against Russian aircraft, cruise missiles, and drones. In one documented engagement in July 2025, a single IRIS-T battery destroyed 8 Russian cruise missiles within 30 seconds, with the battery deploying exactly 1 missile per target for perfect accuracy. It's clear that the system's capabilities are staggering. Each IRIS-T SLM battery can engage targets up to 25 miles away and at altitudes up to 13 miles. The missiles use advanced infrared imaging guidance, making them incredibly difficult to jam or deceive with countermeasures. That's because, unlike radar-guided systems that can be blinded by electronic warfare, IRIS-T missiles see their targets with infrared seekers originally developed for air-to-air combat. The infrared spectrum is much more difficult to spoof with normal means, as aircraft and self-propelled munitions contain engines that naturally give off heat. Stealth aircraft and unpowered glide bombs are one of the few exceptions, the former of which Russia doesn't have in great supply due to other defensive systems, and the latter being more susceptible to electronic interference and having a relatively low accuracy to begin with. What makes IRIS-T truly dangerous is its ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously, regardless of the type. That means that it can target both the aircraft and the ordnances or drones it deploys. When combined with Estonia's relatively small size, a handful of batteries could feasibly provide coverage across the entire nation. Estonia purchased 3 IRIS-T SLM batteries, including launchers, radars, fire control centers, and missiles. The radar that comes alongside the batteries are typically the German-made TRML-4D, which provide 360-degree coverage and can track over 1,500 targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 150 miles. For reference, that's roughly the distance between the country's capital of Tallinn and its other cities and towns. So in theory, a radar station near Tallinn could detect a Russian incursion over any part of the airspace directly over its territory. But Estonia isn't stopping there. In April 2025, the Estonian Center for Defense Investments announced plans to procure a long-range ballistic missile defense system with an estimated price tag of €1 billion or $1.1 billion. The shopping list includes the American Patriot system, the Israeli David Sling, and the Franco-Italian SAMP-T. What all of these systems have in common is that they are specifically designed to intercept the kinds of ballistic missiles Russia loves to threaten everyone with. And with how close Estonia is to Russian military installations, this is key. The Russian town of Luga, which hosts military facilities, sits just 60 miles from the Estonian border. A Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile launched from Luga could reach Tallinn in just 4 minutes, given its neck-breaking top speed of 5,000 miles per hour and explosive acceleration capabilities. Estonia would only have 4 minutes to detect, track, and intercept an incoming ballistic missile threat. Of course, the threats from other sources, such as planes or drones, are going to be much more likely, and Estonia's geographic location isn't working in its favor either, with the entire country spanning just over a few hundred miles, both north-south and east-west. Which is why a multi-layered air defense network that can handle every one of these threats is key for Estonia. This culminated in October 2025 when the Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur confirmed that Estonia would be dramatically increasing its weapons purchases from the US, raising its procurement limit from $500 million to a staggering $4.7 billion. And best of all, Congress had already been notified and approved the increase in exports to a country that's practically on Russia's doorstep and provides the ideal location for staging either an invasion or a barricade. The items purchased read like a wish list for any military planner concerned about Russian aggression. Estonia plans to double its High Mobility Artillery Rocket System or HIMARS rocket artillery systems from 6 to 12, increase its Army Tactical Missile System or ATACMS from 18 to 200, and acquire the new PRISM precision strike missile system that's currently under development. Think about what this means strategically. The ATACMS missiles have a range of about 200 miles, enough to reach well into Russian territory from Estonia's border. The newer PRISM missiles, still in development, are expected to have an even greater range and precision, potentially over 315 miles. These are serious improvements for Estonia's offensive arsenal. When combined with the previous defensive investments, Estonia has become one tough cookie for Russian forces that will have to expend inordinate amounts of manpower and equipment to step up to the challenge. The HIMARS has become legendary in Ukraine, where it's been used to destroy Russian ammunition depots, command posts, and logistics hubs behind the front lines. Each launcher can fire 6 rockets in rapid succession, then relocate before counter-battery fire can arrive. This shoot-and-scoot tactic has proven devastatingly effective and is one of the key takeaways of modern tactic developments that Western analysts have picked up from Ukraine's experiences. The ATACMS takes this concept to another level entirely. With a range of 190 miles, ATACMS can strike targets anywhere in northwestern Russia from Estonian territory. The missile itself is designed to destroy parked aircraft, munitions storage, anti-air batteries, or even reinforced targets. This is due to inherent variations in the design of the actual missile and warheads stored within. The original design, the M39, contained hundreds of bomblets, which would practically shred their way through soft targets and unreinforced structures, creating larger areas of destruction. With a failure rate of approximately 2%, a vast majority of bomblets would successfully detonate and destroy or inflict serious damage. Then came the unitary design, with one large 500-pound warhead, meant to use its kinetic energy to puncture through initial armor layers, then explode for maximum damage to reinforced targets, military vehicles, and buildings. The kicker is that the proximity to Russia might actually work in Estonia's favor. St. Petersburg, Russia's second-largest city and a major military hub, is a vital Russian lifeline for the country's northwest, feeding into the Kola Peninsula that holds nuclear weapons and likely other military installations. And it sits only about 100 miles from the Estonian border. Even Russian military facilities in the Kaliningrad exclave are well within range, but they are arguably much more threatened by neighboring Germany and Poland, which are military powerhouses in their own right. And Estonia isn't stopping with ATACMS. The next-generation system currently promises even greater range, along with improved accuracy and the ability to hit moving targets. In ideal scenarios, these missiles could reach targets 500+ kilometers away and directly threaten Russia's population centers. And all this while using missiles that go at supersonic speeds and are therefore much more difficult to detect and intercept in time. Estonia is also acquiring counter-rocket artillery and mortar or CRAM systems designed to detect and destroy incoming short-range threats such as artillery shells, rockets, and mortars. These systems could be the final nail in the coffin for a potential Russian invasion, destroying incoming ordnance in those few final seconds of flight. CRAMs are designed to protect high-value targets such as command centers, air bases, munitions depots, and are likely going to become a part of the proposed Baltic defense line stretching from Estonia to Lithuania. It would be the ultimate middle finger to Russia's aggressiveness in the region, with over 1,000 bunkers being built across the 3 Baltic states alongside trenches and resupply roads. When combined with anti-air defenses, Russia will have no real targets to hit inside Estonia, while Estonia will counter by either destroying incoming forces or staging a long-range strike barrage to keep Russia's offensive moves in line. To achieve this ambitious goal of turning back a country with the largest military-industrial potential, Estonia is sparing no expense. In July 2025, Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur announced a €10 billion or $11.6 billion defense investment plan covering 2026 through 2029. To put that in perspective, Estonia's entire GDP is approximately €38 billion or $44 billion. This means the country is committing over 25% of its current economic output to defense over the course of 4 years. When divided yearly, it's far more than the 5% military spending requirement proposed by Trump, which NATO has recently committed to as well. But Estonia is just one member of the largest military defense alliance in the world. NATO itself spends more money on military investment and budgeting than the rest of the world combined, and that's counting the fact that most members have barely scratched the 2% GDP requirement until the last few years. With President Donald Trump calling for an increase in that number and other nations calling for a compromise that could see the military budgets of Germany, France, the UK, and Italy soar to 3.5% of GDP, NATO can get a serious infusion of cash to spend on research and procurement. And for the previous decades, NATO has worked tirelessly to integrate its members into a comprehensive network that shares intelligence in real time and allows each country's military to be deployed at a moment's notice to defend fellow members. In February 2025, NATO also launched 2 new multinational initiatives focused on air defense. 15 allies, including Estonia, committed to developing more efficient solutions for low-altitude air threats flying below 500 feet. Those same nations launched an initiative on passive air surveillance, such as noise detection, to identify threats undetectable by traditional radar. Consider what this means strategically. A Russian aircraft approaching Estonian airspace now faces multiple layers of detection and engagement. First, long-range radar systems integrated into NATO's Integrated Air Defense System can detect aircraft hundreds of miles away. Estonia's radar network, coordinated through the Baltic Air Surveillance Network's Regional Airspace Surveillance Coordination Center in Lithuania, provides real-time tracking data to NATO's Combined Air Operations Center in Oidem, Germany. Second, as the aircraft approaches Estonian airspace, IRIS-T radar systems lock onto it at ranges exceeding 75 miles, tracking its every move. Third, if the aircraft violates Estonian airspace, NATO fighters scramble to intercept. These are likely going to be 5th-generation F-35s or advanced 4th-generation aircraft like Swedish Gripens, all equipped with beyond visual range missiles and sophisticated electronic warfare systems. This is miles ahead of what Ukraine has been using so far to successfully defend itself, and even mount offensive strikes on its occupied or Russia's native territory. The F-16s and the Mirage 2000s Ukraine received were retrofitted with midlife upgrades, sure, but the base is still a previous-generation aircraft that was designed in the 1970s and 1980s. Fourth, if the situation escalates, IRIS-T SLM batteries can engage targets up to 25 miles away with near-perfect accuracy. The Russian pilots would have mere seconds to react before infrared-guided missiles close the distance at supersonic speeds. Fifth, CRAM systems provide point defense against any artillery or rocket attacks Russia might launch in retaliation. And then you get the sixth element, renewed offensive capabilities. Estonia is now likely going to get the capability to strike Russian forces while they're still massing on the Russian side of the border. Ammunition depots, command centers, air bases, rail junctions, and logistics hubs all become vulnerable to Estonian strikes before any invasion even begins. Given that recent estimates of Russia's invasion of NATO were revised from 2025 to 2027, then to 2029, the previous increase in budgeting plays directly into Estonia's hands, creating enough defensive and offensive power to potentially remove any chance of Russia executing an attack on NATO at all. To invade Estonia, Russia would need to mass troops and equipment near the border, establish forward operating bases, stockpile ammunition and fuel, and coordinate complex logistics. All of these preparations would be visible to NATO surveillance systems, and all of them would present targets for Estonian ATACMS or PRISMs. This forces Russia into an impossible dilemma. If it amasses forces for an invasion, those forces become targets before the invasion even begins. If it tries to launch a surprise attack without preparation, it lacks the logistics and support necessary for sustained operations. Russia also likely can't safely attack Estonia without first suppressing its air defenses, but it can't suppress its air defenses without moving forces within range of Estonian strikes. Either way, the cost of aggression increases dramatically. For Estonians and other Baltic countries, fending off Russia is not an average conflict. Decades ago, those states were forcibly integrated into the Soviet Union. For many Estonians, particularly those old enough to remember Soviet times, the threat of Russian aggression is a practically lived experience. This is why Estonia spends more on defense as a percentage of GDP than almost any other NATO nation. It's why half of men born in any given year are now expected to serve in the military, why middle-aged mums and dads are joining the Defense League and training to be soldiers. And it helps explain all the ludicrous numbers surrounding Estonia's investment and procurements against its modest population size. For a small nation on Russia's border, security means constant vigilance, substantial investment, and the willingness to act decisively when resources are limited. Estonia is making a clear statement: attack and you'll pay a price that makes the war in Ukraine look manageable by comparison. And to make matters worse, Estonia isn't facing Russia alone. The September 19th incident demonstrated that NATO's collective defense commitment isn't just words on paper. When Russian aircraft violated Estonian airspace, Italian fighters responded. Swedish and Finnish aircraft also joined the interception. NATO's command structure coordinated the entire operation in real time. If the Russian planes had loitered for a bit longer, they might have been escorted to a nearby NATO base, and all hell could have broken loose. Putin knows this, which explains why Russia limits itself to grey zone tactics that fall short of triggering Article 5. Airspace violations that last 12 minutes are borderline aggressive actions that nobody in their right mind would go to war over. Russia would just get fuel for its endless propaganda machine, claiming to have been attacked when performing innocent drills in its own airspace. Ironically, Putin invaded Ukraine partly to prevent NATO expansion and demonstrate Russian military power. Instead, the war has produced the largest NATO expansion in decades, unprecedented European defense spending increases, and the transformation of the Baltic states from vulnerable frontline nations into formidable defensive positions. In 2001, when the Baltic states were moving toward NATO membership, Putin's reaction was remarkably muted. During a radio interview, he had nothing negative to say about the move, and even went so far as to seemingly commend the states for looking out for their security. This wasn't because Putin loved NATO, but because Russia was still recovering economically and wasn't ready to challenge the West. At that point, Putin needed the West to buy Russian oil and gas, and if that meant ceding the countries that were the first and loudest in their attempts to leave the Soviet Union, so be it. But fast forward to 2025 and Putin faces a very different situation. Finland and Sweden have also joined the alliance, with the former losing a chunk of territory to the Soviet Union during World War II, and the latter famously trying to maintain neutrality throughout it. These two additions doubled NATO's border with Russia, further reducing Russia's suite of options for a land-based invasion, since its nuclear arsenals and ports are even more within reach. And Ukraine, despite horrific losses, has fought Russian forces to a standstill while inflicting catastrophic casualties and equipment losses. Every Russian provocation now justifies further NATO strengthening. Estonia's €10 billion or $11 billion defense investment wouldn't have been politically possible 5 years ago. Now it's seen as necessary and prudent. Germany is discussing removing some of its own spending limits and even joining with France and Britain to extend Europe's native nuclear deterrence options to the entire continent. Which means the September airspace violation was a test. Russia wanted to see how quickly NATO would respond, how coordinated the defense would be, and whether there were gaps to exploit. And they got their answer. NATO responded in minutes, coordination was flawless, and there are no gaps. But Russia also got a message it probably wasn't looking for, that the small nation with 1.3 million people is soon going to be armed with some of the most advanced defensive and offensive weapon systems in the world. Russia is still recovering industrially from the ongoing war, and there's little chance it can mount a proper offense for at least a few years, which gives Estonia time to redouble its efforts and convince the rest of NATO to follow suit. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about the Baltic's comprehensive defense preparations, check out our video on the Baltic Defense Line. And to stay updated on how the war in Ukraine and European security developments are reshaping global politics, subscribe to The Military Show for daily videos.